Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of Mighty Blaze, the book initiative that started the day of lockdown when my whole tour was canceled and everybody's tour was canceled and bookstores shuttered and readers didn't get to interact with writers and vice versa. We're now going on 4 years, so I say we're a little past being a toddler. Um, and we've got 30 employees who are passionate volunteers. And if you want, I've put it in the chat, you can look at our YouTube station where we have a list of every single one of our great interviews, from John Irving to today, this really special guest, Julia Phillips. So, if you have questions for Julia, pop them in the chat and I will ask her them. Don't be shy. Also, I've made it easy for you to order both of Julia's books. Both are like completely blown away incredible. We like bookshop.org. It'll lead you to your favorite indie bookstore or a new indie bookstore. But if you have one near you, just pop in there and go there. Okay, so Julia Phillips is the author of the best-selling novel Bear and Disappearing Earths, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and one of the New York Times Book Review's 10 Best Books of the Year. She's also a 2024 Guggenheim Fellow, and her work has been translated into 26 languages. She's written for the New York Times, The Atlantic, the Paris Review, and she's also on the board of Crimes Victims Treatment Center, a nonprofit that helps people heal from violence. That's something I want to talk about. So Bear, I looked all over for my copy, and I realized I sent it to my 27-year-old son because I wanted him to read it. So I'm going to buy another copy. But you just should know that the cover is absolutely glorious. Bear is this mesmerizing, passionate, terrifyingly beautiful novel of two very different sisters on a Pacific Northwest island whose lives are forever changed by a bear, a real live bear. It's about family, obsession, nature, people. The reviews are astounding. People magazine says a mesmerizing story about hope, sisterhood, and survival with a truly shocking twist at the end. I review for people, but I didn't do that review. So there's was like, somebody else also totally adored the book. Spun with an ever-tightening weave of dread, the Washington Post, Good Morning America Buzz Picks, New York Times reviewed this. It's been reviewed everywhere, and it's absolutely the most thrilling book I've read in a long time, not just for the beauty of the writing, but because the story gets under your skin and stays there. So welcome to Julia Phillips. We at the Blaze we're beside ourselves that you're here. So thank you for being here live from a hotel room.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so bowled over by the introduction. Thank you so much for that kindness.
Oh, you are so welcome. Thank you for the kindness of being here. So, I think part of the unsettling, encroaching terror of the book is that this book came out of the pandemic, a time when everyone was terrified and isolated. And both these sisters feel very, very isolated. And all they want to do is escape their island, go to the city, but yet be together. But so you wrote part of this book during the pandemic, but compounding that, you were also a new mom, which is also isolating and terrifying and beautiful in its own way. How did both of those things find its way into the writing of The Bear?
I think they were fundamental to the writing of this book for sure. As you say, I love being here at a Mighty Blaze because, of course, the pandemic is so fundamental to the story of you guys, and it's fundamental to this story too, and to my story. I started writing this book in 2021 after having my first kid in June 2020, which was a pretty, as you say, it was like isolation compounded. It was a really, really intense experience. We were in our one-bedroom apartment, my partner and I and our newborn, just the three of us, like no help, no one touching the baby, just a lot of fear and worry and anxiety and questions about what the future held. And after a year inside, it was really hard to recognize the life that I had. And it was really, I think I felt desperate. I think I felt stuck and I felt desperate. So I started to write this book, which is about characters who feel stuck and who feel desperate and who want so badly for their life to change, for things to get better for them. And then it ends up happening in this way they really didn't anticipate when you said, like, a bear comes to their door and just shakes everything up for them. It was both of those experiences of pandemic and parenthood were so influential on the way they feel stuck, on the way they feel hungry for change, on how much they want a different life and can't quite seem to access it. And specifically parenthood, the sisters in this novel are really financially stressed. They have
Mhm.
not been able to make ends meet for a long time. They are caretaking for their mother, and there's no doubt in my mind that those experiences on the page were informed by my own financial and medical and caretaking experiences during pregnancy and early parenthood.
Did it make you feel better as you were writing it to give those problems to somebody else? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it made me feel better. It made me feel better to write. You know, it made me feel not alone, even if the people I was not alone with were people I made up. And it made me feel, like I could recognize myself again, which I really had not been able to. And it was an absolute joy to be able to, travel across the country to this beautiful place, this island, San Juan Island, where I had never been, even if only through writing for a while.
Right.
Making up the story about it was an escape in itself.
So I want to talk about disappearing Earth was also set in this kind of wild terrain, and I was wondering, do you feel that when you write one book, you're able to take those lessons and discoveries you made in writing to the next book, or do you look at every book as a totally new book with its own unique problems, or is it a little of both?
Maybe it's a little of both. I'm actually really curious about your answer to that as someone who's written more books.
I never learn anything. I never learn anything.
Yeah,
but
it's so funny. Yeah, totally. Keep going.
So I also want to talk about the Grimm fairy tale this is based on. We talked a little about this beforehand because I still see in my mind, I think it was a golden book that I had that was just the one fairy tale of Snow White and Rose Red. And I loved it so much as a child, but I also was really unsettled by it and disturbed by it, which I think all Grimm's fairy tales are sort of that way. What is it about that story of these two sisters that seem to be, they're so joined at velcroed at the hip that when one marries the bear who's really a handsome prince, the other one gets his brother as a
Yeah.
consolation prize. And also there's something about this, the bear in the fairy tale was kindly, he was actually a handsome prince. The bear in your story is most definitely, well, I don't want to give anything away, but the bear in their story is most definitely something very different. So
Yes.
when you read this story as a kid, what were your feelings about it? And when you thought about it now as an adult, how did your feelings change?
I had the same feelings that you had as a kid, that I loved it and I was disturbed by it and I was obsessed with it. There is something about this particular story that is so, so powerful, I think, and I don't know exactly why. To me, it seems like kind of one of the mysteries of art that some stories just stick with us, and this one really, really stuck with me. There's this Grimm's fairy tale, just for folks who don't know
Right.
haven't read the book yet because it came out just a couple days ago. That there's this Grimm's fairy tale called Snow White and Rose Red about two sisters who live with their mother, and a bear comes to them. So kind of a similar elements as my novel, and my novel was very much intended to take those elements and put them in a different story structure, put them in a different shape, kind of take those elements that had obsessed me as a kid with this fairy tale and make them into something that to me made more sense, because the original fairy tale, I think part of my disturbance and obsession with it was that the story didn't quite come together in a way that satisfied. It was this sort of inherently dissatisfying shape, and I think there was a discomfort in that that was also compelling, and it made me want to try over and over again to make it make sense to me. This book was my big attempt to make it make sense. But yeah, it's a very, very unsettling, perverse, intriguing
Perverse,
story.
perverse is right, because there's something, I mean, when I was really little, I was too little to get it, but there's something very seductive about
Yes.
it. And in the book, the bear is also really seductive, but also terrifying. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about how each sister views the bear. Like, one of them sees the bear as a kind of miracle, while the other one sees only the bear's animal nature. And as
Yeah.
humans, we often tend to anthropomorphize animals. But what I loved about your novel is you veered from making us see the bear as possibly very human and magic, but also terrifyingly wild. I mean, this is a
Yeah.
bear. That is terrifying. What was it like for you writing each part? Did you sort of feel alternately seduced and terrified? I mean, what was that like?
I did feel exactly that way, alternately seduced and terrified. It was a real pleasure to write these 2 sisters who are so close, very close in age, have lived together their whole lives. They're in their late 20s, but they still live together in their childhood home. Have a very, codependent relationship maybe or interwoven relationship. They don't have a huge degree of independence from each other. They operate as a unit, and so they were able to sort of be 2 sides of a coin, and I could put my own ambivalence, funneled into each of them. So one person I could put all my ecstasy and awe, and the other person I could put all my terror and intimidation, and really explore that and flesh it out in each character, which was a total pleasure. And it was really fun to write because sometimes I would feel, you know, totally convinced by one when she spoke, and then when the next one spoke, I would feel totally convinced by her. It was really fun.
I also wanted to ask if you're familiar with there was this terrifying and fascinating documentary which made me think of your book. I think it was called Grizzly Man. It was about
Yeah.
this
Oh yeah.
guy who he lived among the grizzly bears, and he loved them, and he said, "Oh, they're my friends," and we follow him. And then, of course, after a while, the bears maul him and eat him. And it was, it's like what you want all your novels to do. You want them to be inevitable and yet surprising. And that was
Yes.
that. I mean, there's this kind of
Yes.
push pull. And the sisters, Elena and Sam, react very, very differently to the bear. I wanted to ask you, did you always know that Sam was going to be really the major character over Elena? I mean, both sisters occupy the same amount of space, but it's kind of like Sam who tells us more than Elena does. And we see a lot of more stuff through Sam's eyes.
Yeah, that's a great question. It did seem to me always like that we would be sitting with Sam, that I perhaps it goes back to the fairy tale origin of this story, but I really loved and identified with Rose Red and the Snow White and Rose Red story. Snow White was the older sister. She was a bit more virtuous. She was like more good, seemingly. She's the one that marries the prince at the end,
I
and then
know,
Rose Red
right?
was this, kind of wilder or more prickly runner-up of a younger sister. I'm also a younger sister, and I liked that. I liked Rose Red's Rose Redness, and I think when I thought about this story, I thought about it from Rose Red's point of view. Sam is not a fairy tale girl. She's
No, she's
a
very
complicated
complex.
contemporary woman. Yeah, but
Yeah, I want to.
I liked it from her point of view almost.
Yeah, she's completely complicated and complex, and I loved reading about her. I just, she she reminded me a lot of some of the characters, and you know what, I completely forgot the name of the author, but it's this, I'm sure you've read it, this book Eileen, about this woman.
Oh yeah, oh my God, yeah.
It's kind of like this, you can't take your eyes from her. It's kind of like, you're not, I never would think
that means the world to me, because I love that book.
I love that book. I absolutely love that book. But you would never think, oh, I'm going to call Sam up and we're going to go out and get coffee and go shopping. But you would want to know.
Even if you did, I don't think she would accept the invitation. I think she would say, no, thank you.
But you would want to know, what is she doing? How is she navigating through the world? She's totally complicated and fascinating, and unlike modern day heroines, and yet she is very modern and complex. And I loved it. I just loved it. I wanted to also talk about place, because Disappearing Earth also dealt with this strange, almost magical place. So was Bear marinating while you were writing Disappearing Earth? I mean, were you thinking about this book at all, or did it just sort of come out of the pandemic? Because I felt like the writing in Bear it felt different, but it also felt to me more powerful. And I was trying to figure out why. And the only reason I can think of why it feels more powerful for me, because it's like this dark, violent fairy tale, which is, those two ideas contradict each other. Fairy tale, you think, oh, it's light, it's lovely, it's got a nice moral, but it's not. It's dark and violent and complicated, and it's like a splinter. It stays with you and it doesn't get removed. So were you thinking about this book when you were writing Disappearing Earth?
No, I was not thinking about this book while I was writing Disappearing Earth. In some ways, I think this book was the story was a splinter that got me very young. These elements, this, original tale was inside for years and years and years, but it always seemed to me like something that I didn't know how to approach. I didn't know how to do it. And so I kind of like set it aside as a childish thing. When I was writing Disappearing Earth, I wasn't thinking about the next book at all. And then when I finished it and I was preparing for publication, I thought, I have to come up with the next book. And the next book has to be really brilliant and good, with a capital G, and A++ gold star. And I have to show that I'm a real writer. And I was trying to work on these projects that just were not happening. They were not working. And I was trying so hard to be, a professional grown-up author. And it wasn't working. And finally, I got to a place creatively and professionally and emotionally where I thought, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to write a good, a perfect story. I don't know how to do something better than I did before. I don't know how to do something that other people will approve of. So if I don't know how to do any of that, then what do I want to do? I mean, what do I want to do just for me? What do I love, and what am I obsessed with that is a pleasure to work on every day and doesn't feel like a kind of punishment that I'm assigning myself, like write 50 lines to prove that you are, a good girl or whatever. And this story was that. This story came dark and violent and just kind of burst out and was an absolute ecstatic pleasure to write, because it tapped so profoundly into an experience, like a joyful experience of play on the page that I had not had for many, many years, maybe since childhood. It was a very ecstatic experience to work on.
Thank you so much for saying that, because first of all, a lot of writers don't talk about how there are failures along the way. And I think that the perception of somebody like you is that it's all easy. It's all brilliance that just pours out on the page. So I love hearing you very honestly.
I keep waiting for that day.
I love hearing you say how very honestly that, no, they were false starts. There were bad things. I also totally loved that you said that you weren't writing to the market. You weren't writing for fame or anything. You were writing what was obsessing you. I always ask a question at the end of these writing interviews about what's obsessing you now, because I'm very obsessive. But I think that's what makes your work such genius, because you are digging deep and going into the core and putting all of that out on the page. And I think that's really important information for any writer out there to, know about and know about. So I wanted to talk about the natural world. What's your own relationship to the natural world? How do you see it?
I think it's not as present in my day-to-day as I would wish. I grew up in a very suburban suburbs of New Jersey, and now I live in New York City and Brooklyn. And so the settings that I've been around the most are really kind of like densely populated and developed by humans. And I think because of that, maybe I really love to write a story where there are not a lot of people around. um, and I really love my writing to be a way to journey to a place that I'm not usually, and to be able to learn about a setting where I am not living. And it, it's it was a real joy when I was like, stuck in this apartment building, to imagine these characters on this beautiful island with land around them, and able to walk out where nobody sees them and able to have these private experiences that nobody else sees. That was not an experience I was having at the time, and I just loved it.
But isn't there also in these landscapes, like they're sort of like the bear in themselves, in that they're so seductively beautiful and almost like a paradise, but there's also terror in them. I mean, disappearing
Mm-hmm.
Earth made me really frightened. And so did every time Sam went in the woods, I was frightened too, because you
Yeah.
never knew what was going to happen. And then we got to that terrifying ending, which
Oh, but no spoilers, of
no, no,
course.
no, 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 no spoilers, no spoilers, which again was inevitable and yet totally shocking. Um, so I want to ask you, did you always know that the book was going to end like that, or do you know your endings, or did that
I
take
always
you
think
by surprise? Because I was just gobsmacked. I literally had to reread it a couple of times to say, "Oh my god!"
I always think I know my endings, but I think I sort of pass from certainty to certainty. Like I begin the project and I think I know where it's going, and then all of a sudden in the middle I realize, oh no, it should go somewhere else. My favorite story about that with this book is that when I first told my agent about it, I said, I have this wild idea and I really want to work on this crazy story. And it's, contemporary domestic realism meets Grizzly Man. And it's, I said, and at the end, one of the sisters gives birth to a baby bear. And she said, oh, okay. She said, well, and she was fabulous. She's wonderful. And she was like, you know what, I love this. I can totally see it. I think that could be enchanting. And I think it's so cool that you don't know where the book's going to end. And I said, oh, no, I do know where it's going to end. She's going to give, maybe you didn't hear me, like, she's going to give birth to a baby bear. I think it's so cool that you don't know where it's going to end. And so she was spot on. I did not know where it was going to end, but I definitely, felt convicted at every moment of the writing process that I did. It was just that conviction
Okay,
sort of kept going different places.
you have you ever seen the movie? It's an Icelandic movie called Lamb. Lamb,
No.
Lamb. Oh my God, you have to rent it right away,
Okay.
because it's the most amazing thing. It's about these. Well, I don't want to tell you what it's about, but you will love
Okay.
it. You will love it. It sort of
Okay.
plays off
I
of
can't
that.
wait to see it.
So, what was your research on bear behavior like? What surprised you? And did writing bear change the way you think about bears? If you thought about them before?
Um, I definitely thought about them before. I love a bear. They're my favorite animal. My research, I read there's a lot of great material, especially podcasts and memoirs about people who have come in very close proximity with a bear, which often means people who have, survived bear attacks. And it was really, really helpful to read, to think about how bears, for example, like how they behave when they get distressed or when they're about, like when they're feeling stressed. Um, they drool a lot. They kind of hop up and down on their front feet. They behave differently. It's not, like in the movies where they roar and then come at you
Right,
or something.
right,
They
right.
are showing their stress in different ways. They smell really bad, which I had no idea about. And this was a,
The
a
book went into
uniform
that.
report.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I loved this. This was uniform for so many different people's experiences with bears, that they stink like rotten meat and wet dog, and that they're incredibly smelly, which I had no idea about. And it was just a pleasure. I think one of the things that I developed an understanding of, or is actually jumping back a bit to what you were talking about, anthropomorphizing these animals. I think I had anthropomorphized them more before beginning this research, and that doing the research made me feel that that a bear is a bear. And when I look at a bear's eyes, I'm not seeing a human's eyes looking. It's not an enchanted prince looking back.
Right,
It's a bear's eyes,
right.
and they're and trying to map, you know, facial expressions, a human's facial expressions, or personality, or which is not to say a bear does not have its own personality,
Right.
but that it exists in its own world. It exists in a world of bears, and that for me to try to kind of project onto that a human understanding is insufficient to really grasp it at all, which I hadn't thought of before, and which I felt really strongly the more I, watched these movies about them and read about them and looked at their faces through the internet.
They're fascinating. And so which is more
Gorgeous.
frightening? Which is more frightening for you? If you were in the middle of the woods alone, would you rather be faced by a bear or a man? That's been
Okay,
on
I love
TikTok.
it. Um, I So the question of fright, I think, is an interesting one, a really interesting one. There's a
Yeah, it
kind of
is. It
fright
is.
that is a thrill. Like there's a kind of fright that we chase, and it
That's right.
is like an adrenaline that people, I don't know, bungee jump or skydive or hold lions for, or there's a kind of um, joyful terror and awe
Yes.
and sublime feeling that I think sometimes we chase. I see bears a lot less frequently than I see men in my life. And I think a bear would, perhaps running across a bear in the woods might thrill me more. But I don't know. I haven't been in that situation too often.
There's also a lot about class in this book. Sam is less well off than her boyfriend Ben, who she feels he doesn't appreciate what he has. Sam complains that people don't know her reality, which juxtaposes with Elena's reality, where that the bear is magical and safe, and the bear makes her feel alive. She also says when she talks to the bear listens, whereas Sam feels that nobody listens to her. These people who are rich
Mm.
and privileged, they don't listen to her, and she's
Mm-hmm.
mad about that. Um, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about class also, because there are also authority figures that Sam does not trust. She doesn't like the woman who's the so-called authority on bears. She doesn't like the sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a divide there. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I said before that a fundamental experience for this book, foundational, was not just the experience of the pandemic, but the experience of new parenthood for me.
Oh
And
yeah.
new parenthood was it made a lot of theories I had about how my society worked or how the country worked become a day-to-day shock and disaster that I had been lucky enough not to confront before. So, for example, uh, and in my own experience, which was like being pregnant, having a baby postpartum, I you go to the doctor a lot. a lot. You deal with health insurance a lot.
Oh yeah.
Our birth cost us $10,000 because of our health insurance. I then you don't have paid leave, and
Right. That's
you
right.
have to there are no childcare supports.
That's right.
There's no like community care at all unless you can pay for it. And so the thing that stands between an unlivable life and a livable life is not any sort of social service or structure or anything that like a common decency. What stands between you and a livable life is how much money you have.
That's right.
I Of course that's always been true in America. I think that's true for, but I hadn't felt it so acutely, or it hadn't felt so close to the bone until I was going to the doctor every week, or like having to pay these bills over and over and over again, which I'd been lucky enough not to have to do that before. I hadn't had such prolonged interactions with so many broken systems, and so in this book, this story, it was essential to me. That experience in my own life made me more obsessed than ever with talking about money. I want to talk about money all the time.
Right.
And I wanted in this story to talk about money and how not having it makes Sam and Elena's life impossible. They need care for their mom, and there is no community care available to them. And that would cost money that they don't have. They need freedom or relief or comfort or care. And it's just not coming because the people who are able to access it are people who are paying for it, and they can't
That's
pay
right.
for it.
That's right.
And so it was really important to me to write about that here. And the setting was in part chosen for that. San Juan Island is this gorgeous tourist destination, but it also has some of the biggest wealth disparity in the region around the Pacific Northwest. And the divide between the haves and the have-nots is really strong. And of course, like everywhere in this country has become stronger in recent years with the pandemic. It just was crucial to me to talk about money as much as possible because
Oh
it's always
yeah.
in my mind.
Yeah. It is a real problem. I mean, when our son was ready to go to preschool and school, the schools are exorbitantly expensive, and if you don't have good free public schools, it's really hard. It's really hard to juggle all that money, and there definitely is a divide. And it's hard. I had one friend who she was able to get a scholarship to send her child to, I think it was Dalton. And of course, he had all these famous friends. And one day, one of his friends came over, and she has a very nice apartment in Manhattan. It's great, it's big. And the kid came in and looked around and said, is this the whole apartment? Like, don't you have more rooms? Don't you, and all the kids were going off to like California on the weekends. And my friend's kid couldn't go because there was no money. And and nobody really understood why. Well, I want to move on I want to talk about the Crime Victims Research Center because I think that's so interesting, and I love that you're involved with something like that. So tell us about that, and tell us, is there a website or something that I can post up here that people can learn more about
There
it?
is.
Oh, good. Tell me what it is.
It's cvtcnyc.org, the Crime Victims Treatment Center, cvtcnyc.org. It's a fabulous, fabulous organization. If folks are in New York, I highly recommend it. It is a place that offers free healing services to survivors of interpersonal violence. So that's like free counseling, like group and individual therapy, psychiatric services, like, holistic treatments. It's a wonderful place. And the way that I first got involved with CVTC was as a volunteer. They have actually recruiting now for anyone around New York City. They have a volunteer program that puts volunteer advocates in emergency rooms around New York City for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. So if someone comes to the ER seeking services, then there are folks there, volunteers there, who
It's great.
stay with them the whole time. Yeah, it's fabulous. It's a fabulous, necessary program. And I mean, when I talk about community care and social services and what should be there, to me, this is what should be. This is a really robust, established, beautiful program of people looking out for each other and saying, you know, if you're in distress, I'm here non-judgmentally, and like with my whole heart. I'm here to listen to you and respond to your needs. And that is sadly a really rare experience, I think, for all of us. And when we find it, we got to chase it. We got to cultivate it because it's the best that there is.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's absolutely phenomenal. And for all of you listening, I put the link up there and look it up. It's Crime Victims Research Center. I want to know, what's the worst piece of advice somebody ever gave you in your writing career?
Oh my gosh. That's a really good one. I don't know, all sorts of like, excuse me, stupid shit. You know, just and I've said all sorts of stupid shit to other people too. I remember someone telling me that my first book would never be published because I had the last name Phillips and it was set in Russia. And he was
What?
like, well, I mean, like,
Okay, that's bizarre.
But it's not always the way when we, you know,
Yeah.
in a writing group say like an editor will never take this, you know, you'll never get published. We don't know what's going to get published. What we're talking about
No.
our butts, excuse me very much. We have no idea. So this person told me that. So that always stood out to me. Someone told me that they want to, that like a project wasn't working because one of the main characters they wanted to slap in the face. That was like, that was just feedback. That's not even advice. But I think, you know, she was advising me to set the project aside.
Oh my!
Just all sorts of things about people. Anytime someone makes a pronouncement about how the work is, when what they really mean is "this is not my taste,"
Right, that's right. Or they don't get
the
it.
worst. Yeah, they don't, and that's fine.
They don't get it. It's fine.
I can't tell you how much stuff I read that I don't get, but it always cracks me up when someone is like, let me tell you how it is. And I'm going to tell you something about how writing works or how, like, they don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Yet.
Okay, and my last question, which I always ask, as I said before, what's obsessing you now and why?
Well, this is funny. What's obsessing me now for real in my life is my kids. So my kids are very young. They're 4 and 1. And I'm legit obsessed with them. I just like look at pictures of them all the time when I'm not with them. And when anyone asks any question that has any possibility of talking about them, I'm like, well, let me tell you about my kids. I'm very obsessed with my kids. And I think it's showing up on the page in a way that is interesting to me because I don't feel able or ready or like can't write about parenthood yet. It's really new still to me, and it's so enormous and so I can't get my teeth around it at all. It's just a huge experience that I can't reckon with. But watching them become people makes me even more interested than I was before in how people are. You know, they are so passionate and feeling and full of love and full of needs, and it makes me feel really intensely our adult passions and feelings and love and needs, and it makes me feel differently toward my characters and differently toward the stories I want to write because I feel more like, oh boy, I get it. You know, I get it. It's hard to be a person. It's hard to be a person in the world. maybe a little bit more tenderness than I did before.
Well, I'll tell you, it keeps on getting amazing. It's more amazing. My son is 27, and he just called this afternoon and said, "I want to have dinner with you and Dad." And I mean, it was like fireworks going off in my head. I mean, the
Yeah.
way it's very hard to explain to somebody who doesn't have kids, and not having kids is a perfectly okay decision. But for
Maybe
me,
even good, maybe even a
yeah,
great
maybe
choice.
even good. But for me, having a child changed everything, just everything, everything, everything. So I get it. I absolutely get it. I tell all my friends, if you have baby pictures you want to send them to me. I will quell over them. I love babies. My husband has to stop me because when we see kids on the street, I want to pick them up. I want to take them home.
Precious.
Well, we need to stop. So I want to thank everybody who was here, everybody who was brave enough to post a comment. And it's cool if you were too shy to ask a question, because I know you're all out there. And you can watch this again and again on our YouTube station. Don't forget, I put in bookshop.org so you can order all of Julia's books. I will see all of you next week. And Julia, you just hang on. You don't go anywhere, but everybody else, I'll see you next week. Thank you so much.